ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायण नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवतसेवया भगवदुत्तमा श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकीनन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः। हरि ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। We are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 29, from verse 45. Yeah. शब्दब्रह्मणि दुष्पारे चरन्त उरुवित्सरे मन्त्रलिङ्गैर्व्यवच्छिन्नं भजन्तो न विदुः परम्. Despite the cultivation of Vedic knowledge, which is unlimited, and the worship of different demigods by the symptoms of Vedic mantras, demigod worship does not help one to understand the supreme powerful personality of Godhead. यदा यस्यानुगृह्णाति भगवान् आत्मभावितः स जहाति मतिं लोके वेदे च परिनिष्ठिताम्. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. तस्मात् कर्मसु बर्हिष्मन् अज्ञानात् अर्थकाशिषु मार्तदृष्टिं कृता श्रोता स्पर्शिष्व अस्पृष्टवस्तुषु. My dear King Barhishman, you should never, out of ignorance, take to the Vedic rituals or to fruitive activity which may be pleasing to hear about or which may appear to be the goal of self interest. You should never take these to be the ultimate goal of life. स्वं लोकं न विदुस्ते वै यत्र देवो जनार्दनः आयुः धूम्रधियो वेदं सकर्मकम् अतद्विदः. Those who are less intelligent accept the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies as all in all. They do not know that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where the Supreme Personality of Godhead lives. Not being interested in their real home, they are illusioned and search after other homes. स्थिर्य दर्भैः प्राग्अग्रैः कार्ष्णेयेन क्षितिमण्डलं स्तभ्यो बृहद्वदाम्वानि कर्मणावैषि यत्परं तत्कर्म हरितोषं यत् सा विद्या तन्मतिर्यथा यया. My dear king, the entire world is covered with the sharp points of kusha grass, and on the strength of this, you have become proud because you have killed various types of animals in sacrifices. Because of your foolishness, you do not know that devotional service is the only way one can please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You cannot understand this fact. Your only activities should be those that can please the personality of Godhead. Our education should be such that we can become elevated to the Krishna consciousness. हरिर्देह भृताम् आत्मा स्वयं प्रकृतिरीश्वरः तत्पादमूलं शरणं यतः क्षेमो नृणाम् इह. Sri Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the super soul and guide of all living entities who have accepted material bodies within this world. He is the supreme controller of all material activities in material nature. He is also our best friend, and everyone should take shelter at his lotus feet. In doing so, one's life will be auspicious. Savai priyatamaschatma yatho na bhayam anva api iti veda savai vidwan yo vidwan sagurur harihi. One who is engaged in the devotional service has not the least fear in material existence. This is because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the super soul and friend of everyone. One who knows this secret is actually educated, and one who thus educated can become the spiritual master of the world. One who is an actual bona fide spiritual master, representative of Krishna, is not different from Krishna. Narada Uvacha Prashna Eva hi Sanchinno Bhagavata Purusharshava Atra me Vadato Guhyam Nishamaya Sunishchitam. The great saint Narada continued, O great personality, I have replied properly about all that you have asked me. Now hear another narration that is accepted by saintly persons and is very confidential. क्षुद्रं चरं सुमनसां शरणे मितित्वा रक्तसडङ्ग्रि गुणसामसुलुब्धकर्णम् अग्रे वृकान् असुतृपो विगणय्य प्रश्ने मृगं मृगया लुब्धकबाणभिन्नम्. My dear king, please search out that deer who is engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along within his wife, along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business and he is enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden. Just try to understand his position. He is unaware that before him is a tiger which is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind the deer is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. Thus, the deer's death is imminent. सुमनः समधर्मणां स्त्रीणां शरण आश्रमे पुष्प मधुगन्धवत् क्षुद्रोत्तमं काम्य कर्म विपाकजं कामासुखलवं जैह्यौ पश्यादि विचिन्वतन् मिथुनी भूय तद् अभिनिवेशिता मनसा सडङ्गृह गणसाम गीतावद् अति मनोहर विनीतादि जनालापेष्व अतितराम् अतिप्रलोभित कर्णम् अग्रेव्रक यूतवद् आत्मन आयुर् हरतो हरतो हो रतात् हरतो हो रात्रान्तान् काललवविशेषान् इव गणय्य गृहेषु विहरन्तं प्रस्ततम् एव परोक्षम् अनुप्रवृत्तो लुब्धकः कृतान्तोऽन्तःसरेण यन् इह पराविद्यति तम् इमम् आत्मानम् अहो राजन् भिन्न हृदयं द्रष्टुम् अर्हसीति. My dear king, a woman who is very attractive in the beginning but in the end very disturbing is exactly like the flower, which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. With women, the living entity is entangled with lusty desire and he enjoys sex just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. He thus enjoys a life of sense gratification from his tongue to his genitals, and in this way, the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. United with his wife, he always remains absorbed in such thoughts. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talks of his wife and children, which are like the sweet humming of bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. He forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with passing of day and night. He does not see the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about the superintendent of death who is trying to kill him from behind. Just try to understand this. You are in a precarious position and are threatened from all sides. सत्वं विचक्ष्य मृगचेष्टितमात्मनो नन्तश्चित्तं नियच्छ हृदि कर्णदूनीं च चित्ते जह्अङ्गनाश्रमम् असमत्तयूतगाथं प्रीणीहि हंस शरणं विरमक्षमेण. My dear king, just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and you give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruitive activity. Give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. राजा उवाच श्रुतम् अन्वीक्षितं ब्रह्मन् भगवान् यद् अभाषत नैतज्जानन्ति उपाध्याया किं न ब्रूयुर्विदुर्यति. The king replied, My dear Brahmana, whatever you have said, I have heard with great attention, and considering all of it, have come to the conclusion that the acharyas, teachers, who engaged me in fruitive activity will not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me? संशयोऽत्र तु मे विप्रा सञ्छिन्नस्तत्कृतो महान् ऋषयोऽपि हि मुह्यन्ति यत्र नेन्द्रियवृत्तयः. My dear Brahmana, there are contradictions between your instructions and those of my spiritual teachers who engaged me in fruitive activities. I now can understand the distinction between devotional service, knowledge, and renunciation. I had some doubts about them, but you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life. Of course, there is no question of sense gratification. कर्मण्यारभते येन पुमान् इह विहायतम् अमुत्राण्येन देहेन जुष्टानि सयद् अश्नुते. The result of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. इति वेदविदां व्यादः श्रूयते तत्र तत्रः कर्म यत् क्रियते प्रोक्तं परोक्षं न प्रकाशते. The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities, but practically it is seen that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So, how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of this work in a different body? Narada Uvacha Yenaivarabhat Yenaivarabhate karma तेनैवामुत्र तत्पुमान् पुङ्क्ते हि अव्यवधानेन लिङ्गेन मनसा स्वयं. The great sage Narada continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. शयानम् इमम् उत्सृज्य स्वसन्तं पुरुषो यथा कर्मात्मनि आहितं भुङ्क्ते ताड्रे तादृशेनेतरेण वा. The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. ममैते मनसा यद्यत् असाव अहम् इति ब्रुवन् गृह्णीयात् तत् पुमान् राद्धं कर्मयेन पुनर्भवः. The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that, my duty is this, and therefore I shall do this. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoction. Thus he gets another body. यथा नु मीयते चित्तम् उभयैरिन्द्रिये हितैः एवं प्राग् देहजं कर्म लक्ष्यते चित्तवृत्तिभिः. One can understand the mental or conscious position of a living entity by activities of two kinds of senses, the knowledge acquiring senses and the executive senses. Similarly, by mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life. नानुभूतं क्वचेन चानेन देहेनादृष्टम् अश्रुतं कदाचित् उपलभ्येत न यद्रूप रूपं यादृग् आत्मनि. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. तेनास्यात्तादृशं राजाल् राजल् लिङ्गिनो देहसम्भवं श्रद्ध श्रद्धस्वानुभूतोऽर्थो न मनः sprashtum arhati. Therefore, my dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous life, previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. मम एव मनुष्यस्य पूर्वरूपाणि संसति भविष्यतश्च भद्रं ते तथैव न भविष्यतः. O king, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus, the mind indicates the past and future bodies. अदृष्टम् अश्रुतं चात्र क्वचिन्मनसि दृश्यते यथा तथानुमन्तव्यं देशकालक्रियाश्रयम्. Sometimes in a dream we see something never experienced or heard of in this life. But all these incidents have been experienced at different times, in different places, and in different conditions. Sarve kramanurodhena manasindriya gocharaha ayanti bahusho yanti sarve samana so janaha. The mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desires for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the mind, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these images sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. Satvaikanishte manasi bhagavat parshvavartini तमसः चन्द्रमसिवेदम् उप उपरज्यावभाषते. Krishna consciousness means constantly associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in such a mental state that the devotee can absorb the cosmic manifestation exactly as the Supreme Personality of Godhead does. Such observation is not always possible, but it becomes manifest exactly like the dark planet known as Rahu, which is observed in the presence of full moon. नाहं ममेति भावोऽयं पुरुषे व्यवदीयते यावद्बुद्धिमनोक्षार्थ गुणो गुणव्यूहो हि अनादिमान्. As long as there exists the subtle material body composed of intelligence, mind, senses, sense objects, and the reactions of the material qualities, the consciousness of false identification and its relative objective, the gross body, exist as well. सुप्ति मूर्च्छोपतापेषु प्राणायान प्राणायन विघाततः नेहतेऽहम् इति ज्ञानं मृत्युप्रज्वालयोरपि. When the living entity is in deep sleep, when he faints, when there is some great shock on account of severe loss at the time of death, or when body temperature is very high, the movement of life air is arrested. At that time, the living entity loses knowledge of identifying the body with the sense, so with the self. गर्भे बाल्येऽपि अपौष्कल्याद् एकादशविधं तदा लिङ्गं न दृश्यते यूनः कुह्वां चन्द्रमसो यथा. When one is a youth, all the 10 senses and the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remains covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of dark moon night. अर्ते हि अविद्यमानेऽपि संसृतिर्न निवर्तते ध्यायतो विषयान् अस्य स्वप्नेऽनर्थागमो यथा. When the living entity dreams, the sense objects are not actually present. However, because one has associated with the sense objects, they become manifest. Similarly, the living entity with undeveloped senses does not cease to exist materially, even though he may not be exactly in contact with the sense objects. एवं पञ्चविधं लिङ्गं त्रिवृत् षोडश विस्तृतम् एष चेतनया युक्तो जीव इति अभिधीयते. The five sense objects, the five sense organs, the five knowledge acquiring senses, and the mind are the 16 material expansions. These combine with the living entity and are influenced by the three modes of material nature. Thus, the existence of the conditioned soul is understood. अनेन पुरुषो देहान् उपादत्ते विमुञ्चति हर्षं शोकं भयं दुःखं सुखं चानेन विन्दति. By virtue of the process of the subtle body, the living entity develops and gives up gross bodies. This is known as the transmigration of the soul. Thus, the soul becomes subjected to different types of so-called enjoyment, lamentation, fear, happiness, and unhappiness. यथा तृणजलोकेयं नापयति नापयत sorry नापयाति अपयाति च न त्यजेन् म्रियमाणोऽपि प्राग्देहाभिमतिं जनः यावत् अन्यं न विन्देत व्यवधानेन कर्मणां मनः एव मनुष्येन्द्र भूतानां भवभावनम्. The caterpillar transports itself from one leaf to another by capturing one leaf before giving up the other. Similarly, according to his previous work, the living entity must capture another body by giving up the one he has. This is because the mind is a reservoir of all kinds of desires. यदाक्षय यदाक्षयस्तरितान् ध्यानं ध्यान sorry यदाक्षैश्चरितान् ध्यायन् कर्मणि आचिनुते सकृत् सति कर्मणि अविद्यायां बन्धः कर्मणि अनात्मनः. As long as we desire to enjoy sense gratification, we create material activities. When the living entity acts in the material field, he enjoys the senses, and while enjoying the senses, he creates another series of material activities. In this way, the living entity becomes entrapped as a conditioned soul. अतः तत् अपवादार्थं भज सर्वात्मना हरिं पश्यं तत् आत्मकं विश्वं स्थिति उत्पत्ति अप्यया यत. You should always know that this cosmic manifestation is created, maintained, and annihilated by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, everything within this cosmic manifestation is under the control of the Lord. To be enlightened by this perfect knowledge, one should always engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. Maitreya Uvacha भागवतः मुख्यो भगवान् नारदो हंसयोर्गतिं प्रदर्श्य हि अमुम् आमन्त्र्य सिद्धलोकं ततो गमत्. The great sage Maitreya continued. The supreme devotee, the great saint Narada, thus explained to King Prācīnabarhi the constitutional position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity. After giving an invitation to the king, Narada Muni left to return to Siddhaloka. Prācīnabarhi rajarshihi praja sargabhirakshane adisya putran agamat tapase kapilashramam. In the presence of his ministers, the saintly king Prācīnabarhi left orders for his sons to protect the citizens. He then left home and went off to undergo austerities in a holy place known as Kapilashrama. तत्रैकाग्रमनाधीरो गोविन्दचरणाम्बुजं विमुक्तसङ्गो अनुभजन् अनुभजन् भक्त्या तत्साम्यतां य अगात्. So let me read again. तत्रैकाग्रमनाधीरो गोविन्दचरणाम्बुजं विमुक्तसङ्गोऽनुभजन् भक्त्या तत्साम्यताम् अगात्. Having undergone austerities and penances at Kapilashrama, King Prācīnabarhi attained full liberation from all material designations. He constantly engaged in transcendental loving service of the Lord and attained a spiritual position qualitatively. एतदध्यात्मपारोक्ष्यं गीतं देवर्षिणनगः यः यः शृणुयात् सलिंगेन vimuchyate. My dear Vidura, one who hears this narration concerning the understanding of the living entity's spiritual existence, as described by the great sage Narada, or who recites it to others, will be liberated from the bodily conception of life. हेतं मुकुन्द यशसा भुवनं पुनानं देवर्षिवर्यमुख निहृष्टम् आत्मशौचं यः कीर्त्यमानम् अधिगच्छति पारमेष्ट्यं नास्मिन् भवे भ्रमति mukta samasta. This narration spoken by the great sage Narada is full of transcendental fame of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, this narration, when described, certainly, one second. एतन्मुकुन्द यशसा भुवनं पुनानं देवर्षिवर्यमुख निःसृतम् आत्मशौचं यः कीर्त्यमानम् अधिगच्छति पारमेश्यं नास्मिन् भवे भ्रमति मुक्त samasta. This narration spoken by the great sage Narada is full of transcendental fame of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, this narration, when described, certainly sanctifies this material world. It purifies the heart of the living entity and helps him attain his spiritual identity. Full of spiritual knowledge. If one can understand the purpose of this allegory, he will certainly be relieved from the bodily conception and will clearly understand life after death. Although one may not understand what transmigration of soul actually is, one can fully understand it by studying this narration. Yeah. सर्वेषाम् एव जन्तूनां सततं देहपोषणे अस्ति प्रज्ञसमायत्ता को विशेषस्तदा नृणां लब्ध्वेहान्ते मनुष्यत्वं हित्वा देहादि is simply advanced in this respect. What is the difference between him and an animal? One should be very careful to understand that this यदि स्याद् आत्मनो भूयात् अपवर्गस्तु संस्मृतेः. If a living entity is developed in Krishna consciousness and merciful to others, and if his spiritual knowledge of self-realization is perfect, he will immediately attain liberation from the bondage of material existence. Adrishtam drishtavannan everything happening within time, which consists of past, present, and future, is merely a dream. That is secret understanding of all Vedic literature. Hare Krishna. Thus ends this translations of the chapter 29 from the fourth canto entitled Talks between Narada and King Prācīnabarhi. Thank you very much for listening, and we will continue to understand the purpose of these part of the verse of the chapter from 45 to the end of this chapter in the next session. पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. धरा श्रीमद्भागवतम की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, निताय गौर प्रेमानंद. हरे कृष्ण.